Okay, as you can see, I've got quite a big subject. It's about changing the world. My assertion is that we can do it in a day if we change the rules and make the right decisions. So that's what I really want to focus on tonight. This is a brief introduction to memes, memetic engineering, and the art of government. So, quickly, my background. I'm an industrial psychologist, cognitive scientist, and political activist, working to understand the causes of human behaviour and how to change it. I've been asking questions such as, why are factories closed, throwing hundreds of people out of work? Why does one team succeed when another fails? Why are some meetings more effective than others? Why do some nations wage war when others never do? Why do taxpayers fund war when we know it's wrong? What causes groups to adopt evil behaviour that none of us would adopt individually? So, let's go on to what is a meme. It is that factor in a social group, community or nation which causes a particular behaviour to take hold in its members or in the subject population. So, for example, things such as driving on the left, voting, paying tax, saluting, obeying orders, speaking English, listening, waging war. All of these are memes. They cause particular behaviours to arise in a subject population. Memes are to groups as genes are to individuals. Whereas genes govern our individual characteristics, such as blue eyes, skin colour, or susceptibility to disease, memes govern our group characteristics, our social behaviour. Memes cause customs, habits, rules, traditions, procedures, laws, systems, institutions, and behaviours to arise and spread in social groups. So what is memetic engineering? It's all about system change. Rewriting, rearranging, redesigning, or replacing the rules that cause outdated or inappropriate human behaviour. It's about creating, inventing, and adopting new systems, habits, rules, or procedures. Let's take a few examples. A memetic engineer will be able to replace central tax and budgeting with local tax and budgeting. That would be a dramatic change in this country. We could also arrange for people to make the laws, not Parliament. In other words, direct democracy. We could replace war with peace, or if you're Tony Blair or Theresa May, peace with war. A good example of a meme is driving on the right rather than on the left. Now, Sweden changed the side of the road it drove on in 1967. One of the best, very best, British examples of memetic change was when we moved to decimalisation. Previously, we'd had 240 pennies to the pound, and we moved to having 100 pennies to the pound. Now that pounds, shillings and pence went out, and we got decimalisation. That was a massive, successful change where 50 million Brits changed almost overnight their behaviour in relation to money. Another one is enacting a new law guaranteeing a free home for all. Russia did this, and it's very simple to institute a law which brings that about. A personal one is changing a thought process, moving from trial and error learning to trial and success learning. That's a major mental shift. I really want to point out that memetic change is instantaneous, but memetic changes are only effective if the current governing means and rules are removed and replaced with new ones. So, let's take a few examples. Whatever the problem, there's always a solution. So on the left, I've put some problems, and on the right, some potential solutions. The biggest problem we've got in this country, I think, is that we're constantly at war, killing innocent people. As a piece of information, we've killed 1.8 million Afghans, Iraqis, Libyans, and Syrians in the last 17 years. That's horrendous. And what we need is some sort of War Powers Act in this country which forces our leaders to enforce the law and ends the use of weapons and armed force, both of which are illegal in international law, but both of which we've ignored for 70 years. Now, there's an example of a good meme related to that. How many people here realise that it only takes 2 minutes to start or end a war? It takes just as long as it takes to sign the orders. Because no member of Her Majesty's forces can go on active service without the express command of the Queen as Commander-in-Chief, all she has to do when the Prime Minister asks her to go to war is to say, no, I will not sign the orders for war until you prove to me that Britain is under attack from the armed forces of another state. Until then, I must uphold my coronation oath and ensure that my people and military forces abide by the laws of war and act in accordance with the UN Charter and the UN Declaration on Principles of International Law. The point is that if the Queen obeyed the law, Britain would never wage war. It's a startling thought to realise that under our outdated constitutional arrangements, one person can wield so much power. It's power over life and death for thousands of people. Unfortunately, the Queen has taken us into 24 illegal wars since she ascended the throne, and we've killed nearly 5 million people in that time. That is the worst record of any monarch in Britain, or in the world for that matter. Any head of state. The second thing we can concentrate on, in Britain, no leader is ever held to account in court for breaking the law, exceeding their authority, stealing public assets, or committing war crimes. If our leaders were arrested and imprisoned every time they broke the law, 95% of our MPs and peers, including Amber Rudd, would be in prison, and Britain would be a very different society. So I propose that we set up a war crimes tribunal at the ICC in The Hague and prosecute 1,000 UK leaders for their war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide of 1.8 million Afghan, Iraqi, Libyan and Syrian people. The next problem I want to address is inequality of income. One simple solution to inequality is to enact a maximum wage act. If we restrict the maximum amount that an individual can earn in a year at, say, 3 times that of the minimum wage, with all earnings above that level being taxed at 100%, we would rapidly solve our inequality problems in this country, and also raise the standard of living of the majority of the people. Now let's consider a solution to the mountains of packaging waste that we generate in Britain each year. If we enacted a reusable packaging act, making reusable packaging compulsory, and ensuring that it carries a valuable returnable deposit of at least £1 per item, we would save everyone in the UK approximately £1,200 each year. Each one of the people in this room spends £1,200 on unwanted packaging. Bottles, cans, cardboard boxes, paper, all sorts of stuff. Now that, taken together, we could save 60 billion per annum on resources such as the plastic and glass and cardboard and energy to make it up in the first place, that is wasted on making one-trip packaging. And a further £10 billion goes on getting rid of it. So a reusable packaging act could have a dramatic effect on waste and resource use in this country. I just also wanted to say that one of the biggest con tricks I've come across in many years is this issue of recycling. Recycling our bottles and cans and everything else. It's a manufacturing con. It costs nearly 20 times as much on average to remake a bottle than to wash it and reuse it. And that applies across the board. The issue is that manufacturers, they increase their turnover and their profits by at least 50 times, because instead of using one bottle, they make us use 50 bottles. Instead of using one bottle 50 times or one jar 50 times, we buy them and throw them away and break them up and give them back to the manufacturers to expensively give us another bottle, jar or container. The last thing I wanted to look at was housing and homelessness. The situation is desperate in this country at the moment. Homelessness is rising exponentially, while at least 5 million people own 2 or more homes. Approximately 15 million people rent their homes and pay extortionate rents, and more young people are cut out of the housing market. It's a disgrace. We must find a solution rapidly. One simple solution I'm proposing is that we repeat earlier successes when Parliament enacted the 1944 Education Act, for instance, providing free education for everyone, and the 1948 National Health Service Act, when we provided free health service for everyone. It's time we had a free home for life for everyone. By enacting a new housing act, taking all land and buildings into local community ownership, and giving every adult resident a free lifetime guaranteed transferable lease on a home, we can eradicate homelessness within weeks and make a massive step towards equality of wealth in this country. So this is just 5 examples of what memetic engineering is all about. A lesson I learnt many years ago is that change will not happen until I do something about it. So now I want to suggest 2 things that we can do locally to change life in Hastings and St Leonard's for the better. The first is to set up and operate a local memetic consultancy think tank to do just this, to identify, expose and report on outdated, inappropriate or harmful local and national, international memes, and secondly, to devise new systemic means, inventive, creative means to overcome the problems, and lastly, to educate and train people in memetic analysis and engineering. So if any of you are interested in this and would like to get involved, leave me your details before we finish and I'll get in touch with you later. Finally, the second project is setting up a local internet, radio and TV internet, radio and TV broadcasting cooperative, with the aim of reporting the truth to local residents, exposing the tyranny and lies of government, corporate and party propaganda, informing and energising local residents to take legal, financial, political and educational action to improve life for everyone in Britain and elsewhere, and supporting local cultural development, the music, arts, voluntary groups, etc. Finally, it needs to give a platform and voice to local people to create a true local community. Finally, I want to finish off to find out who has won this bottle of wine. So if you could just exchange your slips with somebody else, and we'll mark the list, and I'll show the list of memes that changed the world. Okay, so very quickly, 1215 was Magna Carta. And that's an excellent example of a meme, because 63 new laws that have lasted a long time were passed in a day. July the 4th, 1776. American independence. August the 1st, the Slavery Abolition Act. September 1939, World War II. August 1944, the Education Act. October 1946, that was probably the most important legal case ever held, when a nation's leaders were held to account in court for their crimes. 1948, the NHS Act and free health for all. 1970, the Declaration on Principles of International Law. 1971, decimalisation. And October the 7th, 2001, the Afghan war started. But more importantly, paying tax in this country became illegal. And this is due to a law that was brought in 2000, the Terrorism Act 2000, which makes it a crime to fund acts of terrorism, defined as the use of firearms and explosives endangering life for a political cause. Our Supreme Court has now agreed that the military activities and quasi-military activities of the British government are indeed terrorism. So, can I just check? How many people, did anybody get, how many people got 6 of those answers right? 1, 2, 3. How many got 7? 1, 2. How many got 8? So it's 7 then. There's 2 people are the winners.
Do we not have a 9 or a 10?
Huh?
Do we not have a 9 or a 10? Did anybody get 10?
No.
No, you're right. No. 7.
Okay, so thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. Fantastic. So, well, we're starting January very, very hard. So there's a lot of work ahead of us to do. We've got 5 fantastic things that are going to start by changing the world. Actually, there were 2 other words that I probably could have mentioned that would have fed nicely into that. One is a kakistocracy. Has anyone heard of a kakistocracy? I think it's government by the worst qualified people. It's an old English word. So I think we've had plenty of those. And another one, have you heard of snollygoster? Do you know what a snollygoster is? A snollygoster is a politician that is not guided by their principles or morals. So I think that pretty much means that they're all snollygosters and they're all snollygospers. Anyway, part of the Bavard night is that we get a chance to interact with the speakers and ask them questions. So does anybody have a question for Chris and Memetic Engineering? And I'm going to try and look out for I can come dashing in to the audience in a Jeremy Kyle style way and hand you the microphone if you want. Yes, over here. Yes, sir. Right, there you go.
Thank you very much for the talk. Very interesting. Does anybody actually employ you to, as an advisor any body, any individual or body employ you?
No, not yet. But I'm working on it.
Well, tonight.
I have been working in this field for many years as a memetic consultant, if you like, a consultant focusing on teamwork and organisation development. And an example of a piece of work which I got paid for and which started off very effectively was that an engineering company asked me to improve the innovation in their business. He felt that there was no innovation throughout the business, and we really needed to be much more creative and innovative. And he said, could I run some courses? And I said, well, that's a very expensive way of going about it. I think one small change will enable you to achieve what you want without any training at all. And that is a change to the monthly management group meeting. What I suggest you do is put an item on the monthly management group meeting which says every manager must report the innovations that have taken place in his or her department in the past month. The first time they came round to report it, there was no more than 2 minor things. So people felt embarrassed. So they went back to their departments and said, for Christ's sake, tell me some innovations. I do not want to be shown up like that again. And as soon as that word started to spread around the organisation that we're interested and we benefit from innovation, and we want innovation, it changed the organisation within a matter of months. There were hundreds of innovations taking place, even in places like the accounts department and so on. So it was fascinating stuff. Unfortunately, the company got sold, the managing director got sacked, and the whole process dropped out of that particular company.
That's because the accounts department changed. That never happen. That's fantasy. Any more questions? Yes, at the back. I'm going to run.
I've been thinking of doing a Bavard myself, but meanwhile, can you add to your list of completely irrational things that could be changed in an instant, the fact that we all have to suffer very, very dark evenings in the winter by simply the stupid act of putting the clock back instead of forward, instead of giving us an extra hour of light in the winter, they take it off us. Can you suggest how we can possibly change that?
Well, you've just made a suggestion. I mean, it was brought in, I think, in 1942 in order to, because of a war issue, and they didn't want children walking to school without street lights. It's just gone on and on, regardless of whether it's needed or not. This is what happens to most memes. Like the meme of collecting tax to pay for war. Came in 1789, and we've had it ever since. Pointless. And certainly not democratic. So
how can we change it?
you need an Act of Parliament is for that one. If it applies around the country, we need an Act of Parliament, and it doesn't take very long for a majority of MPs to walk through the I lobby. That's the time it takes to change the rules.
Any more questions? I think I saw a hand down here. So one, yeah.
Yes. I'll come to you just for the last bit in a second.
Hello, Chris. You know that you said something about, was it the High Court judges have recently ruled that the governments are doing is terrorism? Did I hear right?
You did indeed. I mean, it's something that, of course, nobody gets told because it's the last thing the government wants us to know.
So
Not even the judges themselves are promoting it. They kept it quiet. But it was about the definition of terrorism, a case on the definition of terrorism, Regina versus Gull, in 2013. You can look it up. It's a fascinating case to look at. But it's very clearly stated that under the definition of terrorism, the military and quasi-military activities of the British government appear to be terrorism. And the punishment for committing acts of terrorism is life imprisonment, up to life imprisonment. And yet no one, not one of our leaders or military commanders or civil servants or police officers or anybody has been held to account for it. So we must do something about it. That's why I've been on tax strike for the last 11 years. Unfortunately, the government doesn't agree with it, the courts don't agree with it, and they keep sending me to prison. So I've been to prison 3 times in the last 3 years for refusing to contribute my tax to unlawful wars and the killing and murder of innocent people.
Brilliant. Thanks. Right. Final question, I think, and then we're going to take a break. So I'll hand over.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for your, how can I say, going to prison on our behalf. The prevailing mood over the last 20 or 30 years seems to have been, what's the point? Do you feel those times have now changed and people will actually start doing something?
It would be lovely if it happened. I think the reason for that, that sort of apathy, there's an apathy, general sense of, well, there's nothing I can do about it. I find that, give talks all around the country, and I find that it happens everywhere. Well, what can we do? And that's really why I'm suggesting there's lots of things we can do. One of them is to get the case raised in court. So I'm trying to do that at the moment, and if anybody wants to support a legal case at the High Court asking for the definition of the Terrorism Act, and does it or does it not include tax, then please, that's one way of ensuring that we can get action throughout the country. There are lots of other ways, and I'd be delighted at some point to go through that in greater detail. I think that's the purpose of having a Memetic group set up in this locally, so we can do something about it. We can get into action, we can break the apathy, we can start to change our country.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, actually, just before we thank Chris again, I just wanted to point out that we have got the wonderful Hastings Independent Press in tonight, and we've got Hastings Online Times as well, so it's some sort of collaboration and something going on there. That would be wonderful. Anyway, thank you ever so much, Chris. Can we put our hands together?